Hey everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back with you for the 218th Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. We are starting off with, I don't know, 37 people, and we're going to have an action-packed a couple hours as always. We want to start with a poem from our laureate, Mimi Gurman, who's in Rattlesnake Country. Tatanka Bricka is going to talk to us about Cesar Chavez. It's Cesar's birthday today, and we want to honor his great being and great contributions to the human race. We're then going to go visit Ukraine. We haven't heard much about Ukraine for a little while, and Howie Hawkins, the great Green, is with us with Dennis Bondar to talk about what's happening in Ukraine. We're going to do that for 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to jump into Wisconsin and to the realities of organizing. We have some great organizers with us, and we're going to deal with that. Because we know upcoming in the next few months, there will be millions of people in the street. And we don't want these demonstrations to be photo ops. We want them to be organizing opportunities, and we think we have some contributions to make as to how to better do that with Howie Hawkins and with Ginny, and hopefully Lee Felsenstein will be with us as well to deal with some of those realities. And in the second hour, we've got a ton to talk about. I'm writing a piece, and Danny Sheehan has been talking a lot about the parallels between the United States today and Hitler's Germany in 1933. I think we all have to get to a point now where we are prepared for the burning of the Reichstag, because we know something like that is going to happen to make an excuse for martial law and to shred the rest of our Constitution. This is something that we have to be prepared for, and that we will discuss in the second hour after we deal with Wisconsin and grassroots organizing. Ton to talk about today. I will say briefly that I was up till 5 in the morning. The Dylan movie is now free on Hulu, and I stayed up till 5 to watch Bob sing Maggie's Farm at the 1965 Newport Folk Festival. And I would have to say, if I was there, I wouldn't have been happy, because I'm not a fan of that song, and I would rather he had stuck with the folky stuff. But we can discuss that. And I do want to give a quick kudo to Edward Norton, who played Pete Seeger. The movie really, in my world, is about Pete Seeger, who I know Tatanka performed with Pete. Pete was an absolute saint. And in a minute, Tatanka is going to talk about another saint, Cesar Chavez. But we do want to start with our wonderful poet laureate, Mimi Gurman, out in Rattlesnake Country. I hope you're wearing your high leather boots, Mimi. Go ahead, please. Make our day.
Okay, thank you, Sluggo. I also want to shout out peace, love, and safety to all of our trans sisters and brothers who are out and noticeable today. So, okay, this poem is part of a series, and this poem is titled Number 8. We chase liberation like a hungover mouse, walking the red line into the shadow of profound death. Project Democracy has been carpet bombed with Agent Orange and the phosphorus of the white male grenade.
Whoa, wonderful. Thank you so much. And Mimi, you're always a joy. It's great to see you and, of course, to hear you. So thank you for that. The white male grenade and Agent Orange. Okay. Great alliterations here. We appreciate it. Cesar Chavez. Mimi, I don't know if you ever met Cesar. I did once. I was on a plane with him, actually. But Tatanka Bricka worked with Cesar for years and years. And today is Cesar's birthday. You're going to pose us a Zen koan, and then we're going to return to you in the second hour to talk further. Go ahead to Takabrika, please.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you for your poetry. Really a beautiful way to always open these meetings. I just want to say I was talking to Camila Chavez a couple hours ago in Delano. They're expecting 5,000 people there at 40 acres
Wow.
in Bakersfield area of Delano, known as the Selma of California. My question is of this audience, and we'll go the story behind the story when we come back, is who, that is, what individual leader was the impetus and actually started the 1965 California Grape Boycott, which was the start of the United Farmworkers Organizing Committee, UFLOC. They dare not call themselves a union at that time. And what group of people was it that went out on that strike? So I'll tell you the answer now, but I'll tell you the story behind the story. The answer was it was not a Spanish speaking Chicano, it was Larry Itliong, and it were the Filipino workers that went out on strike. And the story behind the story is a real story of leadership of Cesar Chavez. So that will be in the second hour.
Well, thank you for that. Laid that down, and this is an incredibly important day. Tomorrow we have elections. One's I know that at least one congressional seat. I don't know how many. There's one up in Florida, and of course we have the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. I do briefly now. A lot of focus has been on Canada. Somehow Trump managed to get our Canadian neighbors and siblings up in arms or almost in arms. And it's a rare feat that he's managed to accomplish here. But we have not been talking lately about Ukraine. And the situation in Ukraine is something we have to visit now. I will say, by the way, the front page of the New York Times has said that this was the worst month in the history of the stock market for many, many years. And I think we are wanting to, at a further discussion, brace ourselves for two things: a crash, and in which we're in the middle of right now, and B, the burning of the Reichstag. And we will talk about that further in the gathering here. But Howie Hawkins, former presidential candidate from the Green Party, and Dennis Bandar, we want to go in and get updated on what's been happening in Ukraine before we go to Wisconsin and grassroots organizing. Howie, you've been over there. You're the first. Well, I was actually in Ukraine in 1996. 1996 was the 10th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster. And I spent a week, there was a global conference in Kiev. We called it Kiev back then. I don't know what. Somehow it changed from Kiev to Kiev. It was along with the week that I spent in central Pennsylvania interviewing the victims of 3 Mile Island. This was about as bad as it gets. We had a week of testimony from people whose lives had been destroyed by Chernobyl. And I will say I want to commemorate my friend Michael Marriott. Michael Marriott was a great organizer, a wonderful guy, great anti-nuclear from a Nuclear Information Resource Service. And he was at the conference, and he insisted after the conference in going to Chernobyl. I have still, if I could grab him by the neck and stop him from going to Chernobyl, I would now. And it was too late, and he died of cancer. And anybody who ever wants to talk about nuclear power, you have to start with Chernobyl. It was an absolute catastrophe. Now, Howie, you were in, and by the way, the statistics show that more than 1 million people were killed by Chernobyl. Don't let them throw these small numbers at you. 1 million people at least were killed by Chernobyl. Howie, I hope you didn't go there. You were in Ukraine. Tell us, please, what's the latest from Ukraine?
Well, let's start with Dennis Bandar. He's a Ukrainian physicist, has a recent article out about Putin's hybrid nuclear war against Ukraine, both weapons and nuclear power. And he can give the background there, and then I can tell you a few things about my trip. So I'm going to put an article that Dennis recently wrote about that hybrid nuclear war. So I'll put that in the chat. So Dennis, why don't you, tell people what you know about this situation?
Thank you very much.
It's terrifying. So, Dennis, go ahead. We're all sitting in the shadow of a nuclear war and nobody's talking about it. Dennis, go ahead, please.
I mean, as I would argue that it's already happening in a hybrid form, actually. It has been happening for quite some time.
A
Sometimes.
hybrid nuclear war.
Yes, that's a term coined by actually one of the managers of Ukrainian nuclear state company, Energoatom, that Russia is committing nuclear hybrid war. Actually, he mentioned this term in his post on LinkedIn on actually the second day of the war, full scale invasion.
So by hybrid, you mean a combination of weapons and power plants?
Yes, exactly. So, Harvey, you started with Chernobyl, and it was a very important event in the history of Ukraine. In fact, the tragedy catalyzed the movement for the independence, and widely believed to be one of the kind of last nail in the coffin of the Soviet Union. And it also was beginning of flourishing ecological movements in Ukraine, which exists until now. And basic idea was that by the time the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine declared independence in 1991, there was general desire for getting rid of everything nuclear in independent Ukraine. And Ukraine was basically proclaimed to be a nuclear-free state, even though at that time the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world was actually in Ukraine. And there were questions about its, sort of on which condition it can remain or can be kind of moved out. And since there was no appetite for keeping the nuclear weapons this decision was directly impacted by Chernobyl experience. The idea was, there was a long diplomatic process which ended 30 years and 3 months ago, exactly from now, in 1995, where basically the Budapest Memorandum was signed. Sorry, 30 years and 2 months ago.
Well, the Budapest Memorandum is I'm sorry to interrupt, Dennis. The Budapest Memorandum was signed in 1994 and 95. It is the one instance in human history that we know of where a country gave up its nuclear weapons and gave them actually to Russia. There were 16 or 1700 nuclear warheads in Ukraine. They gave in a orchestrated, negotiated settlement. They were left over from the Soviet Union. They gave the warheads to Russia in exchange for an assurance of peace and territorial integrity that was signed by the U.S. and the former Soviet Union, Russia. It was agreed to also by France, China, and the UK. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct, yes. And Ukraine officially joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty on Nuclear Weapons, yes.
And in exchange for that, Russia and the United States guaranteed Ukrainian sovereignty. And this is completely unmentioned in the American media, or that this Budapest Memorandum was signed, and the issue of Ukrainian sovereignty was settled in 1994 and 5. Is that correct, Dennis?
1995, yes, exactly. So the exact language in the document, the treaty, it's actually one page. It's very, very, very simply written, very plain language. Exactly as you said, it says guarantee the security assurances, but the full respect of territorial integrity and sovereignty. And yes, exactly. And Harvey, you recently penned an article about this. And the so and so so this is how Ukraine give up nuclear weapon. But at the same time, and that took actually a longer process. Ukraine undergone disarmament in conventional weapons because Ukraine was a party to the treaty on the treaty called Conventional of Armed Forces in Europe. It was a NATO and former Warsaw Pact members signed a treaty where basically like lots of heavy equipment supposed to be either destroyed or move far away from the eastern part. And so, for example, Ukraine destroyed about 1,000 tanks under this treaty
Wow.
in 90s, yes, and now it's begging back for those tanks for 200 tanks, right? Yeah, it's enormous amount of non-nuclear weapons were destroyed, like medium range rockets, etc., etc. So it was it's a very important thing. A historical fun remark that Russia exited this treaty, the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, in 2008, 2 months before it invaded Georgia. So this is an interesting comment one has to be aware of. So
Well, this is a very bad, and we all need to be conscious of this. This is a very bad precedent for disarmament because here you have a country that disarmed willingly both nuclear and non-nuclear weapons, and I didn't know about the non-nuclear part, and then turn around and got invaded.
Yes, yes. Unfortunately, that's what took place, and you're right that there's very few politicians actually talk about this. The Budapest Memorandum, etc. And in a private conversation, they say, "Oh, look, it's assurances, so we don't need to worry about that." Interestingly enough, moving forward to 2022. When Zelensky spoke on the eve of invasion, right, where most of us did not believe this was going to happen, he spoke at the Munich Security Conference, and he actually said that, look, Ukraine has under the Budapest Memorandum, there's this clause which says that if Ukraine feels, if there's a need, Ukraine have a right to call on a consultation meeting of all the signatory members. And so since Ukraine is in war with Russia since 2014, right, when Crimea got annexed, basically the Ukrainian officials have 4 times sent a request for official consultation meeting under this Budapest Memorandum. And Zelensky actually 2022 on the eve of invasion sent the 5th official request. And no one responded. Neither United States nor United Kingdom nor Russia. So it's no one acknowledged. Even they even did not held the consulting meetings, which is kind of tells you how these treaties and commitments were treated by again by the United States and Russia, right?
Terrible, terrible.
And so in Ukraine, right, this nuclear dimension of the war is always there. It's from the very beginning. Basically, Budapest Memorandum is a curse word in Ukrainian language. It's used as a absolutely like betrayal of highest degree, and it's very sad to see that currently we have a new generation of people, of course, influenced by this war, that sort of demand. There's a kind of grassroots demand for return of nuclear weapons, for like let's build them again. And to be honest, I cannot tell you a number of times I have been kind of asked this question. In your opinion, like how much would it cost to make this desire, really like grassroots desire for to sort of revenge for the of course nothing is really happening, but this tells you this change of the attitude in Ukraine.
So how would you characterize now the hybrid war that involves both nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants? Because Dennis, can you tell us, and then we'll go to Howie.
Yeah, so as you said, it's a combination. So it's a combination of things. So we have from the very first day of invasion, of full-scale invasion, Chernobyl site was occupied. And a great historian, Harvard historian, Serhiy Plokhy, actually has a recent book about the occupation of Chernobyl. And also he talks about the occupation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. It has 6 reactors. It's still under occupation of Russia. And so the idea is that these sites were clearly, used as a blackmail, as a nuclear blackmail. And some of the Shahed drones, Russia's using Iranian-made drones, were actually flying in a very close vicinity of other nuclear plants in the western Ukraine. We know recently Shahed drone hit the sarcophagus of Chernobyl, right, the protective structure. So this has been used clearly as a blackmail, nuclear blackmail, and still being used, especially in Zaporizhzhia nuclear, since it's under occupation. And first and foremost, we have to give a huge credit to workers on the ground, because without them, we would have been talking about another Chernobyl. They have paid direct prices. Some of them lost their life for performing duties, their engineering duties to maintain the facility of, in particular, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant safe. So me and Howie are aware of 10 people, 10 nuclear engineers who have been kidnapped by Russians. And
Kidnapped?
kidnapped, that's right, because
Ukrainian engineers are being kidnapped by the Russians?
yes. Because they either participated in a protest, pro-Ukrainian protest, or whatever Trump charges, but they disappear. In fact, these 10 engineers kidnapped, they're literally in order to hold hostage of other engineers who are currently on site of the who are servicing the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And at the beginning of the war, actually, in fact, when a family member wanted to, for example, like relatives of the nuclear engineers were held hostages, so a family member had to go visit Ukrainianly controlled territory. They would like held. It's very cruel, and now these engineers are forced. One of actually diver was actually tortured to death by Russian occupying forces. The diver at the nuclear power plant, his function was to check the cooling ponds, right, the cooling facilities, and to ensure. And the idea is that they wanted to ask him to plant explosive in the facility where the storage of the used nuclear material, used nuclear fuel. So, and he was killed. He actually was given the Order of Hero by Zelensky last year, posthumously, of course. And again, these are heroes. These people are heroes because
and nobody knows this is happening. This is just outrageous.
Mostly it's unknown. Yes, mostly it's unknown, unfortunately. And we are trying to spread the word, but it's not, it's, too many things happening in the world. I cannot blame people, for not following on this one.
So you're saying that while Putin is threatening nuclear war with weapons, he's also threatening to, and I assume it was the Russians who put the drone into the sarcophagus at Chernobyl. That was clearly a threat. I mean, just mind-boggling. Howie Hawkins, you've been in Ukraine recently. Can you give us a quick rundown of what you saw? Howie, are you muted? You got to unmute. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I just put a petition in the chat to have the UN General Assembly pass a Uniting for Peace resolution, demilitarize the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency is compromised and not doing much. They're supposedly inspecting, but I've mentioned this last time Dennis and I were on the podcast or on this podcast, and since then we've got 26,000 signatures. So if you haven't signed it, please look at that. So yeah, I had the opportunity to meet with the president and international representative of the Atomic Workers Union in Ukraine, and they explained that 80% of 11,000 nuclear workers were able to escape to free Ukraine. 20% remain, some of them voluntarily, just to keep the nukes safe. But they've been abused, as Dennis just talked about. Some of them kidnapped, some of them tortured. Those who stay can only stay if they become Russian citizens, give up their Ukrainian passport. If they don't do that, their families in the company town next door, their kids can't go to school, nobody can get health care. So they've been forced to become Russians, but they're staying there to keep the nukes safe. But it's a real problem because they don't have enough staff way down, and the Russians are hiring people off the street who have no training. So there's a lot of concern about the safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuke, independent of any military activity. The other thing that the Russians are using the nuclear power plant for is a military base. And one of the things they do is they train their artillery units with howitzers in the plant grounds, and they shoot across the Dnipro River at the Ukrainians. And that's where they're being trained. And of course, the Ukrainians aren't going to fire back because they don't want a nuclear accident. These nuclear union leaders, interestingly, pointed out to me that the Russians have bombed 70% of Ukraine's wind power capacity, disabled it. And they've left the solar panels in Crimea intact, but they're stealing that power from their their Ukrainian owners. So at the end of my discussion with them, I thought it was interesting that they knew I was a green and I was anti-nuclear. So they asked me what I thought about nuclear power. And I told them I favor renewables because they're cleaner, cheaper, they can be built faster, and they're more resilient against Russian bombing. A centralized power plant and a giant grid is easier to take out than distributed solar and wind power on microgrid. And, they seem to agree with me and almost apologize by saying, well, they had to protect their nuclear workers, including, I might add, people who are at Chernobyl and are still being, they have disabilities from, trying to clean up that mess. And their response was very different than my experience with IBEW or the Utility Workers Union that represent nuclear workers in this country, because I've met with them, I've debated them, and these people seem more like Tony Mazzocchi of the old oil, chemical, and atomic workers, who back in the 80s came, pioneered the idea of a just transition for workers in these dirty industries to get into clean energy and other jobs. So, that was one meeting. I also met with the foremost climate campaigner in Ukraine, Svetlana Romanko. She has an organization called Razom We Stand. I'll put the link in the chat. And before the war started, she was 350.org's representative to Ukraine, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. And she started Razom We Stand to do two things: tighten the fossil fuel sanctions on Russia and get Ukraine to rebuild around renewable energy. And so, I met with her in Kyiv, and she was lobbying the government because there's a big debate about what to do with their energy infrastructure that's been bombed by Russia. And there's one faction backed by business interests, including the state power company, that want to rebuild centralized fossil fuel and nuclear power plants. There's another group of businesses that want to build more decentralized gas-fired plants. And then there are people like Svetlana and, solar energy and wind energy companies that want to rebuild around renewable energy. So that's a big debate within Ukrainian politics. I hate to report this, but Ukraine is in the process of building 5 new nukes, which is kind of astonishing given the legacy of Chernobyl. Westinghouse is building 2 at the South Ukraine nuclear power station near Mykolaiv. They're restarting a nuke that was stopped after Chernobyl in the Cherkasy Oblast in central New York. And then they're building 2 with Russian-made equipment they're getting from Bulgaria. So that's a debate. And then the other thing I'd like to mention, everybody's heard about this minerals deal that Trump wants to, conclude with Ukraine, but it's really a fossil fuels deal. It's a shakedown for fossil fuels. Look at what it's about. It's about gas fields in the Black Sea, gas that can be fracked in Ukraine itself, and the huge oil and gas fields in Russia, because Western oil companies like Exxon and Shell want to get back into the business in Russia. And so I'll put an article in there that Antonia Juhas wrote in Rolling Stone recently about how this is really about fossil fuels. So, and in Ukraine, the people I was meeting, like Sotsialny Ruch, or Social Movement, a socialist organization, the Ukrainian Green Party, Razom We Stand, and Svetlana Romanko, they all oppose this minerals deal because they see it as, Putin and Trump getting together to carve up Ukraine between them. So that is a brief report.
Wow.
A lot of
You
people
guys got to write this up. No, nobody knows this is happening. Ukraine has just fallen off the radar screen here, and we all have to understand that Gorbachev said that the number one reason that the Soviet Union fell was Chernobyl. And when I was in Kiev in '96, I met with what were called the liquidators. These were the guys, they were draft age guys who were forced by the Soviet Union to go in through Chernobyl and clean it up. And, you ran in allegedly for 90 seconds and threw a rock off a roof or something and then ran out. And these guys all got zapped and they're all dying of cancer. And they really remind me of the Vietnam vets against the war during in the 60s and 70s. And they are the ones who really brought down the Soviet Union. And now to hear this insanity of continuing with nuclear in Ukraine and this concept of a hybrid war, if you guys got to write something up, send it to me, and we'll put it up about this, because nobody's talking about this. It's absolutely insane.
Well,
And
Harvey,
it's a terrible reversal of a disarmament decision that was made in good faith. Howie?
Yeah, I've been writing up a series of dispatches from Ukraine, well, from Europe, because I was in Georgia and some other European countries, that's in a a webzine called New Green Horizons. So some of this, I haven't finished with Ukraine yet. I've already done about 16 reports. So it is being written up. And, if you can think of other outlets that'd be interested.
Well, put the links in the chat, send them to me, and we'll revisit this because this is a great hidden travesty here that is absolutely outrageous. We've got 75 people with us. Steve Caruso. Anybody else want to jump in on this? Then we're going to move ahead and go to Wisconsin. Steve?
Yeah, I think I found the New Horizons link. Hallie and everybody else, please make sure you're sending your links to everybody because I haven't seen one yet from Hallie in the chat. So
Oh,
I'd put
really?
them up. And if you put the links
Oh,
in the chat, I can share them on the screen. So thank you.
Okay, great. Well,
yeah, my
Dennis and
mistake.
Howie, thank you for this. Go ahead, Howie.
Yeah, I just had Dennis on my recipient list, so I'll go back and there are 5 links I'll put.
All right. Well, thank you for this report. I wish it was better news, but this is horrifying, and I don't think anybody anywhere is talking about this. Trump is doing what he does, and again, I want to thank Zelensky for standing up to him in the Oval Office. That was truly amazing, and it took a lot of real chutzpah to stand up the way he did in the Oval Office like that. And the suffering in Ukraine is just unconscionable. And they were hit so bad by. I do recommend anybody. There is an HBO series, a 5-part HBO series called Chernobyl, which is about as horrifying as anything I've ever seen on TV. It goes about 8 hours. It's fictionalized, but close to the truth. And I recommend that you watch it all in one sitting. I watched it over 3 nights, and there was 3 nights I couldn't sleep. I'm usually not affected by this stuff, but again, it's called Chernobyl. It's on HBO, and to really get a sense of the insanity of this, I highly recommend it. And again, the Budapest Memorandum. Nobody talks about it. This war is a total a betrayal of a good faith disarmament deal that was signed in long ago, 1994, 95, and it's unconscionable that this is going on. So thank you guys. We'll have you back. Send me all the stuff. Everybody take a look, and we need to have this war in Ukraine end. And I don't think there's any doubt about who the guilty party is here. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Stick with us and send me all the stuff. Dennis, good to see you. And Allie.
Sluggo,
Yes, Mike,
Sluggo,
go ahead.
do you want to ask if anybody has any questions or how they can
Yes.
get
Does
involved and
anybody
help?
want to chime in on this before we move to Wisconsin here? Anybody want to say anything about Ukraine? I think people are staggered by it, frankly. I was there and it's mind-boggling. Vina Kali, you're in a Ukraine of your own here in southern Ohio. Did you want to have a word here real quick about the nuclear issue before we go to Wisconsin?
Yes, I want to say thank you to the speaker who's talking about it. I had the honor to go to Washington, D.C. when Grossman went, Carl Grossman,
Carl Grossman, yeah.
and I stayed about a week and a half there. And I met the victims of Chernobyl, and it really is heartbreaking. And we stayed in a place where they wine and dine their workers in the nuclear facility. After a year, they get to come here to their retreat. And one morning, I looked out the window at 2:30 in the morning, and there was the Russians dressed up in their black capes sitting on these benches. And it was pretty scary. And it showed me how these people live on the outside of Russia. They have nothing, no blacktop drives, wash their clothes. And so the whole thing is heartbreaking how people are treated in Russia. I got to meet their scientists, and it was an honor to meet them all. And those people are like us. They don't like what's going on either, but they can't say anything. They live in one-room bedrooms. It's just horrible. And thank you again, thank the guy for talking about what's going on over there. It's just so heartbreaking.
Well,
And of course,
Dennis and Howie, thank you. And Vina, you're in your own heartbreaking situation in Southern Ohio dealing with Piketon Portsmouth. So thank you for all you do. So
we
we
I
want to
just want to
continue
say
on.
one more thing.
Please go ahead.
We are reprocessing the Russian stuff, and we have been doing it for since 92 to 99, and I think they're getting ready to start sending more over. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you, Harvey, for your show.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's move to Wisconsin now. I saw this morning a report. Elon Musk showed up in Green Bay and put on a cheese head, and then somebody he was yapping away, and somebody yelled at him from the heckler yelled at him from the crowd, and Elon Musk had the uh, complete insufferability to accuse this guy of being a stooge of George Soros. And here Musk is spending God knows how much money to buy this Supreme Court seat, and then he's accusing someone there of being in the employ of Soros. This, and I did some research on Elon Musk. I'll talk about in a minute. Mike Hurst, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the behavior of Musk and Trump and a lot of the people around them remind me of internet trolls, people who just behave horrendously because they feel like the people they're engaging with are not human beings with feelings. And calling somebody a Soros troll or Soros stooge or whatever, when Musk is the puppet master who has countless stooges of his own, it's just projection. And it reminds me of the old saying that every accusation is an admission.
Well, there we go. And we have the great Lee Felsenstein on, and we also have Ginny Lester, who came to us through Howie Hawkins. And so what we want to do real quick, yeah, there you go. I did see, as I say, a program on Amy Goodman interviewed a guy from The Guardian about Elon Musk's background. And Elon Musk comes from a very deep apartheid culture. He's a white South African, and his family was very originally Canadian, by the way. They went from Canada to South Africa because they liked apartheid, and so he is right out of the racist South African state, and with some Nazi leanings in his on his among his grandparents. So this is he's not new to the party. Let's put it that way. And but we want to jump in now before we talk about the actual stuff on the ground in Wisconsin. We have Ginny Lester with us and Lee Felsenstein. And in previous meetings and with you, Howie, as a great grassroots organizer, we discussed we all know that, well, in the upcoming months, millions of people will be in the streets throughout the United States. As the economy crashes and as the move for dictatorship deepens, people will come out. Now, in Lee Felsenstein's book, there's a discussion of whether these mass demonstrations are going to be anything more than photo ops. Will there be major follow up, as opposed to just everybody coming out, having a good time, making their point, and then going home and with no follow up? We saw that in 2016, 2017, when Trump took power. There were the first time there were mass demonstrations, and everybody celebrated their own power, and then went home and didn't organize. Now Ginny Lester here. I'll let you talk, Ginny. You have organized some rallies, and you use QR codes. Now we talked about that at a previous meeting, and Lee Felsenstein, a great computer godfather, has been interested in this. Ginny, can you tell us what you did at your recent rally to follow up and gather people's data?
Yes. Thanks for having me here. I have been wondering about how to reach people, and the QR codes came about, I don't know, I know they first started around 92. And when I was at at an event, I had a QR code that I made on a one of those clear frames. And so people could just scan it as they went by.
Scan
and
it with what?
With their smartphone, with their camera. And this was when it was still real new, but it worked well. I was trying to get a group of people, about 4 people, to join a project with me, but it worked very well. But it didn't take off until I think it was PepsiCo that put the QR codes on their soft drink cups, and they gave away prizes through it. And now they're much more in use. There are some pitfalls with QR codes because it is essentially leading you to a website address. So a person will scan the QR code, and with their smartphone, since 2017, the smartphone cameras have a program that they recognize a QR code and will pop up the address, and then the person can click and it will go straight to wherever that address is.
So it's an email address, and when you click on, your phone sends an email to where?
To wherever you program with the QR code. So let me show you. This is it's a little business card. And if somebody wanted to scan that QR code with their smartphone, it will go to an email address. And
an email will go from your
from
email
that
to,
person's smartphone, there's the QR code, and their phone will send it to an email address. So let me see if anybody has scanned it. And
so if
yeah.
I scan it with my cell phone,
Mhm.
my Solartopia at Gmail will send an email to a central, to what?
To Will County at ilgp.org.
And then all it will say is that at Will County at ilgp.org, all it will say is that we got an email from your email.
Right.
Or
So
it can go to a
I-
website for your organization where people can sign up.
that is another option. Yeah. So a person will scan that. I will get an email, and I can start, because it's about the one-on-one talking, and so I can start communicating with them. There's also a QR code generator, so you can program the QR code to go to a website, to go to a contact form. And Harvey, I sent you 3 QR codes by your email address. One was for the Ukraine Solidarity Network web. So, and the other was for the contact information off the web, and the other is for a statement that the Ukraine Solidarity Network came up with. This QR code generator is available by free open source, but I am not, let me put this in the chat. I am not versed enough to know if the code is, what's hidden in the code. So anybody who wants to go to GitHub with Studio La Cosa Nostra and look at that code.
Does that go straight to the Corleone family, or
Who knows?
It gives
could.
it gives you a link you can't refuse.
Very good.
Yeah. So, but like Howie, you can see Howie sitting there, and in his background, there's that H2O, right? And he could have a QR code right there. And so somebody watching can just take a picture of it or scan it with their QR reader and then go to the website, whatever he puts up there. But like this weekend, this Saturday, if somebody had a banner, you could have a QR code about this big, and people can scan it. And you can get either contact information or just get them to the website, or however you program it.
Wow. Lee Felsenstein, what do you think?
Well, that's where I started some number of weeks ago. Yeah, you could have a rally and have the the screen put up a QR code. Everybody could scan it with their phones. Zap, they've got a URL or something, or an email. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
But you got to now work on what happens after that and what could happen that you don't want to have happen.
Right.
Which is to say, if you can put up a QR code, say you'll have QR codes printed on posters, and people are holding them up just to get them around. Well, somebody else could put another QR code on a poster, make it look like yours, and that would send them to wherever they wanted them to go to. So you had to think about that. And I worked on it some with my particular crowd and realized there's no good way to make sure that QR code is what should be there. It determines that. And so there's nothing on the QR code itself that says this is valid. You could, think about the next step through and you go to the website. Well, then they can make their website look exactly like yours, except it isn't, and the data is going somewhere else, maybe even somewhere you don't want it to go. So that from there, I drifted over to SMS codes, which I think I've talked about, and I've been doing a little more research on it today. I'm not there yet. And those, of course, are texts that your phone will send and receive. And you've probably seen them about text these 4 digits, and we'll get back to you with a URL or something, a prize or whatever. So there are services that perform that. The one that I found actually turned out not to be doing that. There's plenty that are. And at least there you have, in fact, made an intentional contact to this particular number, which is, you have reserved. And what you get the simplest thing you can get back is just one string, one URL, or it could be an email. But if it's a URL, you click on that and you get the web page you want them to go to. And from that, you can unfold to other web pages, because say you're at, April 5th, everybody's going to be there with all sorts of different approaches. And so an event like that is going to require some work in advance to figure out what's the dispatch website, the first one they hit, how that, the choices on that, where that goes. The groups that are involved with that are going to, of course, be involved with it. They have to be able to provide you with input. So we could put together a service that does that, but it's only an intermediate level. And it has to go out, it has to do a lot of outreach to the groups who would be making use of that data. So, I'm working toward that, and we'll be discussing this, I think, privately. But I haven't come up with a really secure method to do it just with QR codes. QR codes are a good interim kind of solution until the opposition catches on. Then they're vulnerable. So that's all the only,
Okay.
that's my engineering thinking.
Yeah.
Well, this is Jenny, and then we'll go to Mimi and Steve.
Okay. I thought about that, and one of the things, if somebody, because with this generator program, it will show you the address, but of course that can be spoofed. So I said, well, you can take a picture of it, and then when you get home, you can make sure that this is a legitimate site through some URL, HTTP status. It's a way to check codes, etc.
Well, that's going to take some work to figure out.
Right.
So we're going to continue. We're going to have a sort of a committee to work through this quickly, because these rallies are coming up fast. If anybody wants to join in, I know Murtaza, you're in here. We want to continue this. So email me if you want to participate. We're having these discussions. We want to put out like a one sheet that clarifies protocol on how to do this, but we want to make sure that we don't have millions of people coming out for rallies now without doing the organizing to do the follow-up. Because if we had those million names organized in 2017, we might be in a different world. Howie Hawkins, and Mimi, and then Steve. Howie, you're muted. Hold on. Now you disappeared. There you are.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
this came up. Harvey and I were talking about, Bernie and AOC are having these mass rallies, and they get the names of people that RSVP, but most people go don't RSVP. So we're not getting the names. And organizers, the first thing we got to do is take names so we can get back in touch with people. There's a lot of uprise and movements right now, but those ebb and flow and they're spontaneous. You can't call them up and you can't keep them going unless you have organization. And that's, what I think we need to be thinking about. Like on Saturday, there are going to be invisible rallies in hundreds of communities around the country. And most of the organizers are just regular, Jack and Joe and Jill saying, show up at this spot. There's no program, there are no speakers, there's nothing. People are just going to show up with whatever signs. That's where organizers should be taking names. And I don't think a QR code can substitute, completely replace the old clipboard. That's something we should still do. But as I think Ginny pointed out, yeah, sometimes you can't read your chicken scratch. Well, you got to ask them to write legibly and make sure they did. But I think alternative is Ginny said she had these business cards with the QR code. And, if somebody don't want to take the time or they're distracted, give them the business card. And then if they scan it, you will get their name anyway. So I think that's one thing we need to be thinking about as these movements in reaction to Trump come up. There's going to be a lot of people, but a lot of it is spontaneous. It's not organized. And we don't want to be in a situation where when they ebb, we can't get back in touch with these people. So
Right.
we got to build grassroots organizations in this.
Well, I've had experience with clipboards, and I got to tell you, it's a lot of work to take a clipboard with, say, 30 or 40 names on it and transcribe them into usable email contacts. I mean, a lot of times, as you say, it's chicken scratch, and then it doesn't translate electronically. If you miss a dot or something else on the email, it's worthless. And it really is very labor intensive. So maybe what we need to do is print up 10 million QR codes, business cards with QR codes, and have people spread it around, because this we can't sustain this. We can't have rallies that are nothing but photo ops. That's got to change. We've got 73 people with us. Sandy, Mimi first, then Steve, then Sandy and Murtaza. Mimi, go ahead.
So first of all, I think that from the perspective of somebody who's done a lot of organizing locally, the clipboard thing, Harvey, I think you're totally right. In this day and age, it's like reinventing the wheel. When people have phones and they have laptops and they have whatever that organizers could bring and others could bring who are part of the organizational group for any particular rally, and you have people directly, you open it up and say, if you want to put your email on here, cool, plug it in. And then they plug it in and it's good because they've just plugged it in and nobody has to redo it. It goes to your whatever, your page. I don't think that the QR idea is a bad idea. But I do think that we have the means right now. We have maps that are live with where different protests will be happening and rallies will be happening. And I do think that if there are people who want to volunteer or who are paid, who have some time to right now reach out on a national scale to these little communities to say, hey, I'm from Mike, in your case, PDA or whatever. And we'd really like to make sure that you're getting names. Put this out there. We have the maps. We have every single rally that is going to be taking place in a couple days. The question is, how do you get the word out to them? And I do think that there are ways to do that. To really bless us. I mean, like in Oregon, we have rallies going on. I was blown away. I looked at the map. We have 3 different or more rallies going on in the reddest of places in Oregon. It's unbelievable. And so those places would be really key, especially because they're in red pockets in Oregon, to contact those people, which I could do, and say, let's get names.
Okay, so then I do want to say we're almost at the end of an hour. This show will be rebroadcast at the Progressive Radio Network and at some Pacifica stations. You've been with us an hour, everybody. If you want to jump in on this. This is clearly participatory. My email is solartopia@gmail. SOLARTOPIA@gmail.com. Email me. Or you can go to the website also, Grassroots EP for election protection, grassrootsep.org, and plug in that way. But we need people to plug in. The question then becomes, if we give a QR code and people go somewhere, who's going to manage the data and what's going to be done with it? That's the next step. It's one thing to collect the data. It's another thing who's going to be in charge of it and how's it going to be used. Those are questions that it's a good question to have to ask, but we do have to ask it. Steve Caruso, and then Sandy, Murtaza, and Paul. Steve?
Yeah, basically the URL for mail is mail2to colon, and then there's a protocols there. I put links in the chat. I'll put it again, explains how that's done. So when you create the QR code, you put the mail to colon and the email address. And if you want more email addresses, you put a comma after it, a space, and then get the rest of the email. And you can email 20 if you want. But anyway, evolution of spam. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for that. Sandy Bozenius. For those of you not technically oriented, I hope this discussion is of interest, but this is the nitty gritty of what we're trying to do here. If we can't collect these names this time around, we're not going to be as effective as we need to be. Sandy, go ahead. And then, of course, especially now that Elon Musk has everybody's name and social security number, we can't go into this disarmed. Sandy Bozenius, and then Murtaza, and then Paul.
Yeah, it's good to see everybody, even though you can't see me, but that doesn't matter. It's really, Harvey, I really appreciate you talking about it this way, but I just see this as being a completely different world than it used to be. These rallies, they may seem leaderless, but isn't that what we've been pressing for so long? The idea, look, instead of waiting for the leader, for the saviors, just look at ourselves. We're them. And the first time I went to one of these, 50-51 rallies in the State House in Columbus, Ohio, I was like, okay, who's leading this? We didn't know who started it. There was no actual speakers planned for the day. And you know what? I thought it was so cool. There was a march to a senator's house, to a senator's office. People took bullhorns. I spoke for a time. It was really cool. And what happened is people were talking to each other. Instead of having this volley of speakers, you had people talking to each other, being happy. Not one person was like, oh gosh, this isn't very organized. It was so cool. So I think this is okay. Plus, the other way about it is it's not just photo ops. On Saturday, I was at the Tesla. First time I went one of those, 1,000 people. And they had
1,000 people at a Tesla place in Columbus, Ohio?
1,000 people went to the Tesla one. And that was the first one I was able to make. And, it keeps growing and more people keep going these things. And there was one at the State House that didn't have as many people. But I mean, I was worried about it. Like at first, I'm like, let's just have one big demonstration, rally once a week, once a month or something. And we'll get all these people. But what's happening is people are able to go at the times and places that work for them. And they're going out and people are talking about it. I counted the Columbus Dispatch counted 200 people one rally. I counted them. Please count these things. When they're marching, it's easy to do. I counted 800 people, not 200. So it's really cool.
Then was their data collected and will it be used for further organizing?
But the thing is, I'm not worried. I'm not as worried about data being collected. I'm worried. I'm excited by the people being out there. They're not, like I said, it's not just photo ops. For some people, it's a matter of the first time they've been, I've talked to so many people. This is the first time they've done it. And how did they find out about it? Once you know about it, you're in. And you know where to find the information. And that's what's happening. So there's all sorts of spaces. That other person was talking, said all these things. And the other thing I want to say, just the last thing, is that what I think we should be doing with this, people know where to find us, because there's not like one medium anymore. People know where to find things. If they don't, they're finding out from friends. But what I think we should have clear messages, which we do. All these things I've been to, they might have said, we're here for the refuge, we're here for the immigrants, we're here for peace, we're here for Gaza. we're all barking up the same tree. We're all concerned about human rights and the environmental rights. I think the thing that we could spread out is like make sure these are peaceful because the opposition is looking for any reason to get on us. And then like how to, make sure we're coming out if they declare martial law. Like, no way, we're not going to abide by martial law. We know it's made up and we know it's coming, and that's our advantage.
Okay, well,
So
let's
I'm not
talk about
afraid.
that further. Sandy, I thank you for that. That's amazing. Being from Columbus, I will say two things about the
Mhm.
Tesla rallies. Number one, do not burn a Tesla. Those things are really toxic.
Right.
And I have to say that the truck he did that which looks like a vehicle designed for a death squad, that truck
Mhm.
is the first car in U.S. history to have 100% recall. Every one of those trucks has to be recalled because the things are literally falling apart. And secondly, I just want to say somewhere Nikola Tesla is turning over at his grave, and he should not, Musk should not be allowed to use Tesla's name. He was a decent, honorable guy, Nikola Tesla, a very interesting person, and he would be horrified to see this Nazi using his name on his product. Just had to get that off my chest.
Harvey, can I say,
Paul, and then Murtaza.
Harvey, can I say one more thing before?
Okay,
As
very
far as
quickly, Sandy.
I know, as far as the QR codes, I bring my Move to Amend cards. They're all time, and I pass them out individually, and then people can do it at their own pace, so they
Does
know.
your Move to Amend card have a QR code on
It
it?
certainly does, yeah.
Well, maybe we should start, just printing up cards with a Q. But then where does the data go?
I don't think we need one central location. I don't think we need one
Lee
central location.
wanted to say something about that. Lee?
Yeah, that's the whole point is where the data goes. And you've got to contact those people, find the email address they would like to have the data to go to. And what you can do is you can help by generating the QR codes in one point and sending out PDFs of those codes so people can just print it up on cards or whatever, anything they want. But you ain't done nothing until the data has hit the endpoint. So I'm hearing the enthusiasm of this, rallies in Columbus and so forth. Yeah, I've been through that years and years ago. And you need to make sure that people at the end point are able to connect with each other. That is the point of it. Not that they feel good, but
well, we got 71 people with us, and we want you guys to stay. I realize this is a technical discussion, but this is nitty gritty. Obviously, we gotta figure out how to do this going forward. And thank you really for that, Sandy and Lee and Jenny. And now we'll go to Paul, and then Murtaza, and then Howie and Tatanka. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm with Healthcare for Us, and we have a website, and we have flyers with a QR code on, and I go around with my iPad with the website on it, and I link to the internet using my iPhone called Hotspot, and the hotspot on my iPhone gives me the internet, for my iPad, and then I have my website, and then we have different forms on my website. Like if you want to sign up for the newsletter, you can, put in your name, address, and all that, and it goes to a database that's already set up. And then when we do our newsletters, everybody gets it. And, we could say, big, everybody's gathering on April 18th, for a protest or for a march or for whatever. Or listen, we're on KPFK, by the way, every Friday at 7:30 in the morning. So we have a broadcast. We're able to get out that information. So there's Nation Builder, Act Blue. They all have these databases that are already set up. And when you have a website, we use, no-code websites, although it does require some cascading style sheets, which is an object-oriented, simple thing to, for certain effects. But, the websites, basically, you can build a form. It could be parsed out, everything you need without knowing how to write regular expressions, which is, using this code to, to get rid of the ASCII characters and all that stuff. But it's really, really cool. And that's the way to do it. there are already, organizations and servers that will handle your data, and you'll be able to, ActBlue, I think, is one of them. They gather a database of your information that you need. I forget which one we use, but it's what they call active server pages, but it's run. They use this programming language called PHP, and they use that and with HTML, which is hypertext markup language. But basically, you're able to go out with a form. You're already linked up to the internet through your phone, and people fill out the form and they got your information. That simple. Now, if you had that on Solartopia, you could do the same. You could get depending on your website and who's hosting you.
Paul, can you send me a memo on this? What
Yeah.
you do so we want something that we can circulate everywhere so people will have some kind of uniform
So you could do a newsletter.
bottom line here on this organizing.
You can
This is
have
an
a date.
incredibly important discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Right. You
who's
could have a
taken over.
database, and from that database, you can send out newsletters to people who signed up with their email.
Well, obviously, we're going to wind up with multiple databases, Lee. I mean, this is, we're not going to get a single uniform database. Maybe that's a good thing, but we want databases. If it's more than one, as long as there are people on our side, that's the key. We got to
Well,
make sure
the
these are
database
good
stores,
actors.
that specific database stores specifically for your organization only. And you don't have to worry about like multiple databases. It just stores the information, that email addresses or telephone numbers or addresses if you want to send a letter or whatever.
But
So,
is it a commercial do you have to pay for it?
what they do is if you have a donation, they make their money by taking a small percentage of the donations. That's how they do it. That's
And
how.
who is they?
They could be Act Blue. I forgot the name of our guy. We did have Act Blue, but we changed over, and I don't know who did it because I didn't. I originally programmed the website, and then we had Erica Ferriston didn't like it, so she had a professional come in, and we still used WordPress and Elementor, which are no code stuff, and she's a graphic designer, and she put this whole thing together. And then we signed up for this company to handle our emails and everything. And I think it was Act Blue. I don't know what we're using now.
Okay. Howie Hawkins,
I'll
what's the
find
Green
out.
Party use?
We got what's it called? Ginny, what's the name of that?
Nation builder.
Nation Builder.
Nation
It's a pretty
Builder. All right.
expensive app.
Well, maybe we should put out a list of good databases that people can use, Lee, and then people will have assurances of where the data is going. Maybe we can do that. We definitely want to get something out there that puts a floor under this organizing. So when people show up, when 1,000 people show up at a Tesla place in Columbus, Ohio, we know who they are and we can follow up so they can go back to the Tesla place another time. Murtaza, and then Tatanka, please, and then we'll go back to Howie again.
Yeah, good to see everybody. So I think well, one thing I'd note is, yeah, people are finding out about the protests, but we got to do more than protesting, and for that we got to be organized. And I note part of our issue with both parties is the donors are organized, but the voters are not, and we need the voters to get organized. And that means more than just going to protests, also, being able to do the phone calls to our electeds, to write the letters to the editor of the local paper, to control the frame of the message across the country. But really, it all starts local. And so what we do is for our QR code, it goes to a MailChimp page. And so you fill out your name, email, but it also asks for your location. And we actually bucketed it because we have like regional locations. So this way we know which of our activists are in which community, if we want to have something there, who we can reach out to. And we've also asked them like, what is your area of interest? And you don't have to fill out anything, or you can say immigrant rights, or you can say, democracy, or we ask them not to check more than 3 boxes. So we can turn that MailChimp form into working groups. So everything, it's all automated because we don't have to actually fill it out, right? Our activists, when they get the QR code or the web link, they're the ones who fill it all out. So we do this all within MailChimp. And I think there are, like what the previous speaker was talking about, Nation Builder and all those tools that you can do something similar. But we really need to, and I agree, we need to take the people there and turn it into something organized, and it's going to be local, which is why I think Indivisible is a really powerful organizations. They've set up this local groups with a national umbrella for creating change. One other comment to make is, I think somebody mentioned business cards, and those are a great idea. Flyers, people lose them. Business cards sit in your pocket. You get home and you find it. So I encourage all of us to consider business cards are cheaper than flyers sometimes. Well, not necessarily, because they're cardboard, but depending on how cheaply you make them, they can be pretty inexpensive. So it's a great way of making sure that your flyer doesn't just get lost or thrown away or left in the car.
Well, I want to point out that Ron Leonard just sent my cell phone something with a QR code. So there we are. That it's doable, definitely.
And then the
Murtaza, thank you for that.
one last comment is, I think the last piece is, people are also going to search, right? So if they know which organizations have organized the event, and then they're going to look it up after to come back for future events. So it's not all just us getting them to fill out forms. They're also going to find it. And so we need to have some display of who's organized it. And when the speaker speaks, somebody needs to say, here's where you go for more information. So, and we need a public facing web page or face for the organization so that people can find information in the future.
I really like that Sandy talks about rallies that don't have a central stage. In organizing a rally, the biggest piece of equipment is the stage. And if you can do good rallies without central stages, but pass out, I like the idea of business cards with a QR code. If we have good control of where the data goes, that seems to me a good idea. Tatanka, go ahead, please. Tatanka.
All I want to do is give the floor back to Lee, who's thought about a lot of these things from his community memory commitment, and maybe not today, but just how to organize this to have maximum choice and local control of people without giving the opposition the tools to just do what they do with us. Okay, go ahead,
Exactly.
Lee.
Well, I'd like
Lee,
yeah.
how do we protect all this?
Well, I think we need a working group on it. People who are particularly involved and interested, know things about it. I'd like to get together with, a group of 10 or
Okay.
something like that. And
We'll do that. And anybody who wants to join the working group, email me, solartopia@gmail, and we will convene in the next few days. That'd be great. Howie, and then we want to return to you, Tatanka, to talk about Cesar Chavez and the questions you posed at the top of the hour. Howie from the Green Party?
Yeah, I just put in the chat a book that I think helps us think about how we deal with these movements. It's by Vincent Bevins. It's called If We Burn. The subtitle is really what I'm talking about, the mass protest decade and the missing revolution. We've been in the last 15 years through a period of world history with more mass demonstrations all over the world than ever before. Yet coming out of these movements like Occupy and the George Floyd Black Lives Matter stuff in 2020 in this country, or the Arab Spring that spread across North Africa and the Middle East, the Hong Kong demonstration. They call it the Revolution of the Squares, and it's marched across the world, including in Ukraine. That was Maidan in 2014. And today, as we speak, in Georgia, hundreds of thousands of people have been on the street every day for 4 months. Serbia, Turkey. But at the other end of these mass spontaneous uprisings, what are we left with? So it raises the question of power. And where Bevins goes is we've got to have organizations, particularly unions and political parties, that can continue organizing around the demands of the movement when, for various reasons, the movement kind of burns itself out. So that's one comment. I think we need to think about power. If we just protest and go home, the establishment can ignore us, or in some cases just smash us, like in Hong Kong or Syria. And maybe that's what Trump has planned for us here. The other thing I would comment on is that the movement culture has changed. During the anti-Vietnam War movement, I was part of the GI movement with Vietnam Vets Against the War, also with other elements of the movement before I got drafted. And we used to meet, coalitions, meet face to face, hammer out demands, slogans, where actions would take place. And that's gradually been replaced by well-funded nonprofits, some very wealthy people behind them. And it's very top down. I mean, a lot of what we show up to, we had no say in formulating. It just comes to us over the email or the text message. And I think that's why it's so important that whatever your organization is, you're building it locally at the grassroots. So we're all interacting with people in our own communities, which in my experience, makes us all smarter. You draft a leaflet, it's going to come out better if it circulates around the group and people make their comments, or you're coming out with a statement. And I think we're losing that because everybody's, plugged into their screens and not to the people right around them in the community. So I think these spontaneous demonstrations are good, even if they're not well organized. Even without a central stage, you can have, workshops organized and tabling and, a way to sort of organize education and interaction. But without organizations that are going to sustain themselves and aim at power, because we need power to change things. If we're just protesting, we're really just begging the Democrats to do something. And that hasn't been very effective. So anyway, look at that Vevins book. If it doesn't have the right answers, I think it raises the right questions.
Okay, very good. I do want to mention before we go to Tatanka here. Tatanka, are you there? There you are. Those of you in Los Angeles, Nancy Naparco mentioned a film we're showing over the weekend. It's called Far Out. It's a documentary, 50 years on hippie farms that led to the No Nukes movement. Email me directly. If you can't make it, I will send you the link, solartopia@gmail. But we are showing at the Lemley Theaters in LA Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and it'll be fun. We'll have panels afterwards. Encino, Glendale, and then a Monday in Santa Monica. So email me about that. Tatanka, you wanted to, well, let's get Mike Kirsch forward, and then we'll go to Tatanka, and you'll talk to us about Cesar Chavez. Mike, did you want to say something real quick?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Howie for mentioning that we can't sit around waiting for Democrats or any elected officials to do the hard work that we need to have done. That's not what they're for. They're there to basically be browbeaten into doing the right thing, or to be defeated if they won't let us browbeat them into doing the right thing. And Howie, thank you again for mentioning that we need to organize locally. Mimi had to go, but Mimi and I have been discussing ways of organizing super locally, block by block, getting people to put down their phones and devices and getting to know their neighbors through, block parties and stream cleanups and different things like that, forging community back to the way it should be, because we've gotten so alienated from each other and so cut off from nature that we really need to go back to grassroots in terms of actually touching grass and roots and rebuilding our society from the bottom up. We've got a whole lot of rot in the American empire right now. We need to de-imperialize. We need to relocalize and start to rely on each other as neighbors and friends, and we've got a long way to go.
Thank you for that, Mike. Okay, Tatanka, you're going to take us back now to Cesar Chavez.
Yeah, thank you, Harvey. And I told Harvey it's going to take a few minutes to talk about the story behind the story. I asked, does anybody know the individual that started the 1965 grape strike and what group it was? A little background first. From 1962 to 1965, for 3 years, Cesar and Helen, his wife, Chavez, and Dolores Huerta went up and down the Central Valley, the San Joaquin Valley of California, meeting with individuals in the fields and then going to their homes, always using the house meeting he learned from Fred Ross Sr., and asking them the question, basically saying they were interested in starting a farm workers union. They wouldn't call it a union, they'd call it an association to begin with, because it was really dangerous to even have the idea of a union floating around in the valley because of the power of the growers. But they asked the question, what do you want if we go out and strike? What would make it worthwhile for you to take the risk of that? And the answer they got was, surprisingly, they wanted even less money than they thought. But the money wasn't the primary thing. They had two big fears. One was, and a background on this, the average age of farm workers in California in 1965, the average life expectancy was 49 years, which is exactly what it is today. Surprise? Um, because of that, the biggest fear they had was a family member, most often a child or an elder, not having enough money to have a casket to put them in the ground and not having a community with them when they would put that person in the ground. And Caesar and his brother Richard looked at each other. Richard's a carpenter, said, okay, we're going to offer a death benefit. You can make the coffin and we will be there with them. The other thing they said was the abuse of the contratista, the labor contractor system, which was usually a Spanish speaking Mexican or Mexican American like themselves, a Chicano, who was working for the growers. And there was a lot of abuse with this, a lot of women who had to pee in the fields, and they would make sure that they would watch the woman, and the husband knew it and he couldn't do anything about it. And sometimes they were violating the women sexually. So they said, we are going to have a hiring hall, and the people, it won't be it'll be a standard union procedure. It'll be our employee, not the management employee. So when the Filipinos went out on strike, they had been talking to Spanish speaking people this whole time. And they went out in the same fields they were working on. And so Caesar and Dolores and Helen gathered all the people together in larger meetings and said, okay, they've gone out on strike. What shall we do? And to a person, they all said, these are not our people. We don't understand their language. Now, they had been segregated by the growers into linguistic and ethnic groups precisely for this reason. And they said, no, this is not our time to go out on strike. Caesar listened to everybody and said, if no one else goes on strike, I am going out on strike with the Filipinos. We are all farm workers. This was like a first act of leadership. I don't think people even realize the contribution of the Filipino farm workers. The worker who actually went out and was the organizer was Larry Itleon. Now, the actors gang, Tim Robbins in LA, has made a musical which made it into a movie to celebrate Larry. Now, Larry was a leader much like Caesar's brother Manuel, who was not all that committed to nonviolence. Backstories on there on Caesar's fasts, many long fasts. Yes, we're to organize against the growers, but every single one of them was organized against those people within the movement who were not committed to nonviolence. And the ending of those fasts is when he would have Manuel say, okay, I'll take the pledge, Caesar, just don't kill yourself. So anyway, Caesar joined the strike. The other worker that was part of Larry's work is a man by the name of Pete Velasco. Pete was like a Caesar type person. He was an organizer who was soft spoken, organizing behind the scenes, getting everybody to move, sometimes ahead of them a little bit, but not too far ahead, or behind them, and giving them the courage to do what they needed to do. Everybody who came to 40 Acres, where there were over 5,000 people today celebrating Caesar's birthday in Delano, California, everybody who came to Delano was greeted between when the strike started and then all the way through the boycott, was greeted by Pete Velasco. And Pete would introduce people to other people. Pete don't even remember his name. He was one of the vice presidents of the Farm Workers Union. And Pete deserves to be remembered, and Caesar would want him to be remembered because he's the one that did the work of greeting people, introducing them to each other. And when they built the Farm Workers Union, one of the things that they did was they created the Agabanyani village, because many people don't understand that after the first farm workers, who were indigenous and Chinese from the railroads, there were the Japanese. After the Japanese were the Filipinos. All this was before the Mexicans. With the Filipinos, they only allowed men to come to California, said they would get rich, they could bring their families. Many of them were already married. They were subjected to abject slavery. They never got enough money to do anything but stay in the fields and join the migrant workforce. And there was a law on the books in the 60s until the 70s that said that any Filipino man could not marry a woman in California unless she was Filipina, and there were no Filipino women. So by the time Caesar and Dolores got there were all these aging Filipino men who had no families. So they built a village housing for them with a garden there. And when the workers would go on strike, they would be the elders taking care of the kids. So the Filipinos became the first of the broad coalition of all farm workers that joined it. And it was Caesar's leadership that did that. And lastly, I'm just remembering at an event of the free speech movement, they have an annual Mario Savio Award. And Andrea Davis spoke at this conference, and she was talking about coalitions. And she said the coalition that was built around Free Angela Davis, was a true coalition. A true coalition is not talking to the people who already agree with you. It's talking to the people who don't agree with you. Because how many people know that the most important thing that the movement did for me was to get me out of jail so that I could speak? Does anybody here know where the money came from to get me out of jail? Nobody had any money. He said the money came from a white Fresno farmer who put up the money to get me out of jail. Somebody who wasn't part of our movement, had a lot of disagreements with it, but thought I was framed unfairly. That's a coalition. To build a coalition, we have to talk to others and invite them in. So I want to celebrate Caesar by thanking him for that decision to join the Filipino workers and give birth to the UFOC, the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, and then later the United Farm Workers Union. Thank you, Cesar. Que
Thank
viva
you.
Cesar
Thank you.
Chavez, que viva Dolores Huerta, que viva la Unión, que viva.
Well, here's a question going forward, talking about organizing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cesar Chavez. We're now entering a phase where we have a lot of MAGA people who've been really shafted. Nobody expected this degree of insanity. Well, I'm sure a lot of people did actually, but this degree of insanity of, firing tens of thousands of veterans from the Veteran Administration. And now people are losing their Social Security. If you got your Social Security electronically, you're probably still getting it. But if you got it by check, a lot of people aren't getting their Social Security anymore. And you have farmers now, people who are going to be shafted by the tariffs. And the stock market, crashed again. Well, I don't say crash, it dipped again today. Are there people out there now who are not traditional progressives, and in fact may even be MAGA people, who are pissed off enough to start coming to these rallies and even signing up with Q codes? And by the way, if anybody else has something more to say on that electronic discussion, which was phenomenal, and thank you, Lee and Howie for coming on this, and Ginny. But are we in a position now as traditional progressives who are petrified of becoming fascist state, or being halfway in a fascist state? Are there people that we can reach out to, and how do we do it? And how do we make electronic records to allow us to continue to deepen the organizing, which Cesar would have done in a heartbeat?
The first response I have is that there may be some MAGA people that join us. That's true. But everyone else, we have such a broad coalition in this country that is unorganized. So if we consider ourselves progressives, liberals can be organized, moderates can be organized, utopians can be organized. And it's those people who are among, like today, I just had a call from a friend in Santa Cruz who is the head of the Vietnam Veterans for Peace. He finally got up to his veterans group, half of which were MAGA people, about 3 weeks ago, and said, what are we going to do about Pete Hegseth? This is a disaster. This is a disaster for veterans. He had no response. Nobody supported him. Today, he said last night, he went into the hall, and people were saying, you were right. You know what? You were right. He's got to go. We are veterans. We need to stand together. So there's a lot going on, and we just have to be organized and get out of our silos and have a common unity and organize the unorganized that already are with us. Along the way, we're going to find some of the others to join us.
Well, how do we do it? By the way, I just got a text from Pete Hegseth. We'll be attacking China in 15 minutes, so everybody should be ready. Sorry. Well, but it's good to talk about that in the abstract, but how do we actually do it? And is this QR code idea, should we all be carrying business cards with QR codes on them? I mean, maybe that's, if you went into the hall, Tatanka, and had the cards to pass out, maybe
I
that would
have a
be,
lot of ideas. I will be on that meeting that Lee wants to call, and I would encourage other people. We need a
yeah.
working group to talk about this because it's solvable on that angle.
But
I
think
do,
about that. If you'd gone into your union hall and you had a card to hand people with a QR code, maybe that's expands our reach. I don't know. Howie is a great organizer, by the way.
Well, I was going to point, I put in the chat Google Deep Canvassing, and somebody, put the brief definition of it's an empathetic conversation with the idea of moving somebody. And the bigger process there is first you develop a relationship and trust. And once you've got trust, you can talk politics. And not everybody's going to agree with you, but in the labor movement, we call it relational organizing. It's one-on-one. It's the kind of thing that they were doing in the farm workers movement to get people on board. And I think that's the way you approach people who are not in our camp. I don't think they're going to come over in blocks or, with just a QR code and link to a website or an organization. And that's the kind of thing we need to do locally. And I think that's how we're going to win over people that have, been suckered into this, Trump world.
Well, clearly
one-on-one
now,
organizing.
Sandy points out, and it's been pointed out, we're going to see like nonstop demonstrations going forward. Every other day there's going to be a wildcat outing at a Tesla dealership or downtown or wherever, or Social Security now, Veterans Administrations. People are going to be out. I mean, this is desperate times. So how do we make that a vehicle going forward? If it's showing up at the Tesla demonstration with business cards and passing them out, maybe that makes sense. But we can't let these gatherings go by. We've made that mistake. Sandy pointed out, we had Occupy, we had George Floyd, we had all these things happen, and here we are today. And so how do we avoid that photo op missed opportunity, Tatanka?
Well, I just speaking from my personal experience, it was and being organized by Dolores Huerta. The Dolores Huerta Foundation carries on the tradition of Cesar, and they work with the traditional house meetings. They build up to larger and larger groups to affect change, to get somebody on the local city council, get somebody on the water committee, et cetera. But they're always breaking back down into small groups, one-on-ones and the house meeting format, and then building up again. You have to stay in touch with people on an intimate, as Howie was saying, personal one-on-one basis. And you do that by constantly building up and then coming back down, constantly building up larger and larger and coming back down. And there's a way of doing this. We should probably have Camila Chavez, the executive director of Dolores Huerta Foundation, explain how they do it. And also within about a few weeks, I'd like to invite somebody from the work that we've been doing in our Circle of 100 for nearly 5 years now, and have maybe Danny Sheehan explain our progressive government in waiting document, which we're integrating all the latest things in the last several months from the fascist dictatorship we're trying to get out of and hold on to our constitutional republic, and at the same time improve it. So that's the two things I have to offer. The organizing is, and the power of nonviolence, people just really don't understand. And so in Occupy, it was predictable what would happen. And both in Santa Cruz and Oakland, I said, you really need to basically take a stand for nonviolence here because you're going to be infiltrated. Saw the same thing happen with Antifa. It was so easy to occupy and take over by the opposition. So if you're gonna choose to organize nonviolently, and remember, Martin Luther King said that those that make nonviolence impossible make violence inevitable. And so that's a reality. And also in the last part of his life, he said we were going to lose all our civil rights if we don't organize economic rights. So those two truths are also really important.
Great, thank you. Howie?
Yeah, just to add a little bit on the one-on-one organizing. Initially, you should go with the attitude of listening, not preaching. That's how you build a relationship. I found in my canvassing, as a political candidate for the Green Party in Syracuse, there are people that you just ask them what's going on, what are the problems, what do you want to see, and they pour it out. Nobody ever comes and talks to them, including a lot of the Trump people. They feel like nobody listens, and they kind of like Trump because he's kind of an outlaw. But that's the beginning of a conversation. And then you got to build on initially commonalities, things you do agree on. And then you can get to the more difficult conversations once you have a relationship and people know that you're an activist in the community that is going to be there. You're not just, fly by canvassing to mobilize for an election. You're there for the long haul. But the main thing I want to say is we need to initially listen and not go out preaching as if people need a message. A lot of people just need to be heard.
I want to
Like
double down on that. The first thing I learned from Dolores, and she does it over and over again, is that when she meets somebody, she'll just take time to find out about them. And the second thing is she's not afraid of asking anything for anyone. She asks. She asks for what she needs and for what the people need for her. And it's surprising what people will do if you ask, but only after you know who you're talking to and listen to what concerns.
Wow, what a great discussion. This has been really good. Does anyone else want to jump in on this sort of organizing thing? I do want to talk about briefly about Wisconsin, and then we need to discuss. I'm in the middle of a piece about the coming Reichstag fire. And we know for certain that the Trump people will concoct some kind of 9/11 event to give them an excuse for martial law and to finish destroying the Constitution. And we have to be prepared for that. I mean, September 11th was in September. I mean, W. Bush took power January 20th, 2001. And 9 months later, he was totally in the toilet, and suddenly 9/11 happened. So Trump has clearly got one foot very deep in the toilet already, and we can certainly expect an event. So Lynn Feinerman, and then we'll go through Wisconsin, and then we'll, if we don't mind, go to the Reichstag fire. Lynn, go ahead.
Yes, very, very shortly, just to tag in Tatanka's presentation on Cesar and Dolores. We interviewed Dolores for Women Rising Radio, and her final thing that she wanted to say for sure was just tell everybody that I was the one who invented CC.
Right. Yeah, she talked to Barack Obama about that. So there you go. Okay, we have an election tomorrow in Wisconsin. I actually asked Andrea Miller if we could sign up to do phone calling, and she said that everybody's already trained. I get the sense that people in Wisconsin have probably been called 4 or 5 times already, and had their doors knocked on. We did see Elon Musk show up there last night, and he gets more and more abominable. We do have this Supreme Court seat, and with it comes at least 2 congressional seats, because the Supreme Court in Wisconsin will control whether the state is re-gerrymandered. They de-gerrymandered the state, and now, but if they get this Supreme Court seat back, they'll re-gerrymander the state, and at least 2 congressional seats are on the line. There's a congressional election tomorrow in Florida, a very red district, and but there are enough Republican seats up for grabs that if the Democrats won them all, the control of the House would change, and you'd have a new Speaker of the House. So all eyes are on this. Last time there was a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, the progressive won very handily. But Musk has come in there and poured a ton of money, as we know, and totally blatant about it. Except, as I mentioned earlier today, last night there was a heckler and he started going on about George Soros. And then you have, Tucker Carlson and all these other people yelling about billionaires buying elections, talking about George Soros, and completely ignoring Elon Musk. It's a very evil situation, and we have to look for it very closely. So that's something. I don't know. There's not much we can do right now about Wisconsin except maybe support the progressive. It's a non partisan election. They're not labeled Democrat or Republican, but this is a big one, as we well know. We also know, and I'm not prepared to discuss this in detail. We will next week, but Trump has signed an executive order on election that are clearly designed to completely rig all elections going forward. And this is a very big deal. Greg Palast has been talking on Tom Hartman about the detail, and maybe we'll get Greg to come back. But this is the death knell of elections if he gets this through. And it's something we really have to pay attention to. So we'll talk about that next week. I do want to point also, by the way, in the New York Times today, Marine Le Pen, the extreme right wing woman in France, has been convicted. Now, in France, they're very quaint in France. If you're convicted of a felony, you can't run for a federal office. Who would have thought that? We're so open-minded here. Our president has been convicted of 34 felonies, but apparently that's no bar in our country to being in office. But she's been barred from running in France, and it's a big deal. She's very, very right wing, and also, by the way, Netanyahu is on trial for he's in two different trials now. There's been a long-standing bribery charge against him, but I read in the Times today there's a new charge against him. He's up for on two major accounts, and conversely, he's trying to amend the Constitution in a way to do what Trump is doing here, which is to strip the courts of their power. And so this constitutional crisis stuff is going on all over the world. It's a big deal. All right, now we don't have much time left. I do want to talk very briefly and hear what you have to say, because I'm in the middle of a piece. How do we respond to what we know is coming, which is some kind of event? I doubt they're going to hit the World Trade Center again. They're not there, but some kind of burning of the Reichstag event. And what are the parallels that we're seeing more and more between the MAGA people and the Nazis? MAGA, NAZI, very similar. And Trump has very deep similarities to Hitler, obviously, starting with a total lack of compassion or empathy. Are we prepared for an event that we know is going to happen within the next few months that will be used as an excuse to declare martial law? I see a resounding silence. What do we think is going to happen? How do we respond to it? Forewarned is forearmed here. Sandy?
I'm so grateful that you're writing this paper. I should have done it myself a long time ago. But yeah, I've been seeing it for a long time. And somebody, I can't remember the name, said he says he thinks maybe it could be Hitler's birthday, which is April 20th or something like that. No, I think this is what they have to do because they're losing ground so much and they need to scare people. And the scare tactics are working. Partially, not fully. So I think making every connection as possible to what's happening here, to what happened under Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin. I always think it's funny, like Pravda is truth in Russian, and we have Truth Social with Trump. But there are so many connections, and then maybe this is getting out too much in crazy stuff, but I feel like we need to put a stop to people, let them know that if you're engaging in this kind of violent acts, our side doesn't do that, but the other side tends to. If you engage in it, connect it to what happened after World War II, after the Nazis were thrown out, prosecutions, the Nuremberg trials, so prosecutions, and start taking names like that. But But I think I'll just end it by saying everything they're doing, I see connections to what happened under those dictators. And I think the more we make those connections, people will see it and stress out that if they call martial law, we're not going to obey. We shouldn't be obeying a lot of these laws that they're passing. We should still talk about DEI and things. But martial law, that's a line too far, and we're not going to obey it.
Well,
I'd like some thoughts on it because I don't know if that's a crazy
yeah,
idea either.
exactly. Well, do we know what the military would do? What if he decided to actually invade Greenland or Canada? What would our military do? I
Yeah,
mean,
I think the military doesn't have to obey illegal orders, and
well,
so
well, Hitler had the Wehrmacht swear a personal loyalty to him.
mhm.
The German army, the German military was not sworn to protect the German state. They were sworn to protect Adolf Hitler. And, clearly the people he's put in charge of the American military are beholden to him.
Yep.
But
Um, what about the grunts?
typically
What will
officers are make a pledge to protect the country, to do what they can for the country. Someone said that enlisted personnel, which I was one, I should know this, pledged to abide by the president, the commander in chief. But officers are giving their oath to the country, not to the commander in chief per se.
Well, Howie, you were a military guy, and then Murtaza.
Yeah,
How are
when
you in the Army?
you swear in, you swear an oath to the Constitution, whether you're enlisted or officer.
Well, okay. And what do you what here's another question, and this I know it sounds abstract, but when you compare Trump to Hitler, the question then comes up, well, Trump isn't running death camps. So the question then becomes, is Donald Trump capable? Would he actually run death camps as an individual?
Actually,
Is he bereft enough of empathy and compassion to set up and operate an Auschwitz? Just a question, but
so that actually leads directly to the comment. I mean, so I was going to make two comments. One of them is last Sunday we had someone from the German Resistance Center. This is a museum. It's a national museum of the German government, and speak about the resistance to Nazism. And remember, the death camps, they started as concentration camps in like 1933 for political prisoners. They weren't death camps till like 5, 6, 7, 8 years later.
yes, and
19
there were basically very quickly there were 6 death camps, and they were all in Poland. The Nazis never ran an actual death camp, even though people died by the tens of thousands in the concentration camps. But there were no gas chambers on German soil. They were all in Poland.
Dachau didn't have gas chambers? I mean,
No,
I'm not an expert on this. Okay.
no,
But
they had ovens. I
okay.
was in Dachau.
Okay.
They had ovens, but no gas chamber.
Well, so we had the speaker, and she was a great speaker. We only had 40 attendees. I publicized it just a few days before, but I think we're going to do it again. And she was a great speaker. She spoke English natively, and she has family here in the U.S. And I mean, I think the two main takeaways were, at people they thought it was going to be 4 years. At the beginning of when Hitler first took over, people didn't realize this. We're talking about 1933 to 1938, 39. I mean, Kristallnacht wasn't until 38. World War II didn't start till after that. It's a long road. So, and she said that her comparison to where we are today is like 1932. So we're still in the early stages where resistance is possible, and this is the time to resist. The other issue is the problem the resistance failed is because people didn't realize or didn't believe things would get so bad. And so instead of putting unity and resistance, they put their own little group interests. The trade unionists had their own self-interest too. Different groups had their own interests. And so they were not focused on let's resist fascism. They were focused on some of their own internal group interests. And so those two kind of led to the failure of the resistance. So we're going to probably hold another seminar. And yes, the Niemöller poem, it's
Well,
very relevant today.
I will
The other
say the
comment,
number one, well, there are two things. First of all, the United States does not have the kind of dictatorial roots that Germany did. There's no real tradition of democracy in Germany. Democracy is actually a relatively new construct in the German nation, as opposed to here, where we,
yeah,
allegedly
she
come
she
from.
brought that up. But
Yes.
I think when you look at what Trump is doing, it parallels in so many. I mean, basically, he's basically trying to overturn norms and approaches and laws that we normally use, and that's what Hitler did too, right? There's also this
Yeah.
interesting thing with like the Enablement Act, where congressional approval or parliamentary approval is actually a big deal. Like that's the way they get some, like even dictators need the consent of the governed, whether it's by
Right.
force or by motivation or incentives. So Congress is powerful still, and unfortunately, I mean that was why Schumer's failure was a big deal, because that's the
Right.
time. I mean, we need to use whatever power we have. Well, so that was one thing. The second comment was that the local networks that we can create from these protests by bringing people together at the local level, that's going to be our best tool to dealing with whatever happens after the Reichstag fire this time. I agree
And
with you at the military level. I mean, that's some things people have to think nationally, but I think these local networks, community networks are crucial.
you're right.
Yeah,
I would say one thing
Sluggo, if I could just get in real quick, could we bring that speaker to our Zoom? Would it be
yeah, Natasha,
possible?
can we get that contact? We'll get that person to
So,
join.
yeah, she's in Berlin, so it was a 9 a.m. call on Sunday just to
Okay.
get aligned with timelines, but sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, that
I
could be
will say
difficult.
one thing.
Another thing, well, Sluggo, real quick, I wanted to mention that for many people, their family life is dictatorial and patriarchal, where the children don't get to talk back or they get slapped across the head. Sometimes the wife doesn't get to talk back or they get slapped across the head. And in our daily life, many people work for a corporation where they do not have a voice at the workplace. So while our government is, roughly speaking, a representative democracy, rigged as it is, imperfect as it is, a lot of the other sectors of our daily life are not democratic. And a lot of people are comfortable with that because they're used to it. And that's the chilling thing that these right wingers have been tapping into. So we have to be
Right.
aware of that there are people who are psychologically, if not happy with living in a dictatorship. They are more or less used to living in a dictatorship in their family life and in their work life.
That's interesting. There's a big picture thing also, which is that Hitler came to power in a terrible economy. I mean, it makes our economy, even though tough as it is, seem for many people, the German economy was completely destroyed when Hitler took power, and he improved it with military spending. He gave people jobs, and he revived, in the eyes of the German people, he revived the economy. And Trump has inherited an economy which, of course, is very difficult on a class basis, but in traditional terms, he inherited a very strong economy, and he's sending it deep into the toilet. And that is a major flip on the Nazis that Trump has the butt end of, and we'll see what happens. I mean, you got the late night guys saying basically, if you look at the drop in the stock market since Trump took power, he has cost the American economy $5 trillion in market value, and Tesla alone has dropped by 50%, and it's going to go way much further down. It's an interesting dynamic to try and take into account. Paul Newman and then Howie Hawkins.
No, I just wanted to say that Trump does using private prisons. There's one in New Orleans where ICE is taking people off the streets without due process and putting them in because they spoke. One guy wrote an op-ed, and he's in New Orleans, and it's a private prison, and it's known for its abuses. And the El Salvadorian prison is is a death camp. And let's face it, the Trump administration is a death cult, just like Nazi Germany. And they're doing it, and this is a wake-up call to all of us. We got to see he's willing to do this. The fact that he's willing to send people to an inhumane place who are innocent without due process. And when the judges ask him to take him back, he hasn't done anything yet. Take the guy who's in El Salvador. They're putting people and they pay them. So, I mean, nowadays it's the paid death camps, and it's going to expand, and so this is how he thinks. And if he thinks this way, this is how Hitler thought too. And we got to get far more extreme against these guys.
Okay,
I land my
within a
plane.
nonviolent framework. And again, this is a nonpartisan discussion. We're not pushing the Democratic Party here, far from it. Howie Hawkins, and then anybody else want to jump in? We're almost out of time. So raise your hand now or hold your peace because we will go off at 4:20. Go ahead, Howie.
Well, back to your original question about what will be Trump's Reichstag fire, I think he's going to blame the lunatic left of radical Democrats and Antifa and infiltrate our movements with provocateurs who will do violent acts, which will give him the excuse to crack down. And that's why nonviolence, as we talked about earlier, as our method of struggle, I think is going to be very important. So we are not set up to be smashed. On the other question of what the military will do if they're ordered to invade Greenland or Panama or Canada, I think it might split. I mean, I talk with a lot of veterans. I'm in an American Legion post and I was in the Marines. I got a network there. And a lot of them, talk about would they follow orders to take over Greenland? And they say, hell no. That's an illegal order. They have a right under the Uniform Code of Military Justice to refuse illegal orders. On the other hand, there's parts of the military that are very, chauvinistic, U.S. imperialist, and they'll do it, and they like Trump. So the military might split. That's, I think, what might happen. So those are my thoughts on those questions.
Well, I hope we don't have to find out, but my gut sense is that he's lost a lot of the country. He's certainly losing even a lot of the ruling class, the billionaires. And by the way, Bernie is still at it. I mean, I watched a half-hour speech Bernie gave to the Congress a couple days ago, and he's just impeccable. I mean, he really has it still, and the millionaires and billionaires, and it's quite amazing. I think it's going to be interesting to see how AOC proceeds through this, but that's an interesting question. But these are things we're going to have to deal with right now. I will say one thing, and then we'll go to Tatanka. One thing that Trump has done has forced us to really look at how easy we've had it for the last while. I mean, we grew up and there are all sorts of problems with civil rights and the Vietnam War and all these other things, and economic inequality and unions, all the struggles we've had. But we've never really questioned the core of our ability to speak freely and to vote in elections and to do a lot of, and to be free of fear of being picked up at random by the Gestapo. And Donald Trump is forcing us to really appreciate what we've had and to now calculate how we're going to resist it. The FBI is now basically a Gestapo. I mean, it's run by his guy, and if you're picked up by a Trump official, what's your recourse? We talked months ago about setting up a lawyers guild to deal with a random arrest. I think it's something we got to talk about. Tatanka? Oh, I got to mute you here. There, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to bring it back to speaking out for whomever is targeted and back to Caesar as well. I don't know if people know who the first two martyrs were in the farm workers movement. You might think they were Mexican American because you identified as that movement. The first martyr was a young 19-year-old Jewish girl on the Florida Sunkist boycott. And the second martyr was an Arab Muslim man in California on strike. And I bring that up because no matter who Trump goes after, well, first of all, as we organize, we need to be local communities of resilience. We need to take care of each other and take care of our local communities because that's going to be, as is mentioned by Howie and others, that will be our strength. But also, whoever they pick on to take away, we need to be active. And while Trump's down now, maybe it's a time to really ramp up Greg Palast's work about Vigilantes Inc. and make the case that this election was stolen. I mean, maybe people have, more. I mean, every day is a false flag with Trump. We're just getting inured to false flag after false flag because, like Hitler's job was to lie and blame. He let the administration, he let his own Project 2025 devise the death camps. He didn't get into that. His job was just to lie after lie after lie and blame and create suspicion against Jews and anybody who was an outlier who didn't agree with him. So Trump is doing his job. Then the administrative state is doing their job, and their job is to tear this all down. It might be interesting to have the guy on, the author who talked about Trump as a Russian asset. It's totally credible to me. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can do now while Trump is in an unpopular position. Maybe people can hear the fact that this election was stolen. And also it would basically, you'd have a discussion about the corporate Democrats, and we need a party that isn't answerable to the corporations. That includes the Democratic side as well as the Republican side. So, and there's plenty of people in that space to support that kind of movement.
Well, we're up against it now. I don't think anybody has any illusions about where we're going and how we need to protect ourselves. As Americans, bad as it was during the civil rights movement, bad as it was during Vietnam, the time that I was most scared in this country was in 1972 when Nixon, carried 49 states and seemed to have the world at his feet. And the next thing you knew, he was on his way back to California. So is Trump on that trajectory? He's made no one. I don't think anybody expected him. Well, I can't put. Let's say that most of us are surprised, even I, about how deep he's gone. These mass firings at the federal government, they can't do him any good politically. I mean, there are people out there who say, yeah, these people are this and that, but come on. I mean, Robert Kennedy just fired 10,000 people. That's a small town. And what is the number of people that they've thrown out of their jobs at the federal government? And, the measles outbreak in Ohio has now escalated. And
I mean, for a minute,
nobody is happy. Nobody likes this attack on Canada or Greenland or even Panama. I mean, that's crazy stuff.
Harvey, to bring it personal to me, to get off of Trump and all the horror which we know about right now, my question for me is I've never seen a movement as strong as the early civil rights movement. And my question for me is to act, what does it take for me to act without fear? What does it take for me to say this is a good day to die? Because young kids, all the way up to old people, that was that kind of day for them in the civil rights movement. And we need a kind of forward, upward, positive movement that will attract people in, as Howie said, asking questions, finding out about them, having them come to a place that is a calm in the storm, even as we're busier than a calm in the storm where they just feel gravitated toward us. And whatever our philosophy, our faith is in something beyond this life, now's the time to call on it and gather strength from it, to understand that, just as we gather strength from ancestors, we are the ancestors of the ones who will go before us. So my question to me in the face of all this is, am I ready in any moment to act without fear? Because I know there's more than just this. There's more than just this. And I think that's a key question that all of us need to ask. And we can generate that as a movement because it's been done before. And bring in the people like the George Lakeys and whatever is going to be brought in to talk about. There are governments that have taken back their countries from dictatorships and learned from them. I know they worked with the different spheres of influence within a civil society, the media, the university, whatever. They worked basically to rebuild, even as the dictatorship was in force, to rebuild what could be built so that what came after was more democratic. That's what has been shown. Nonviolent movements lead. Even Stephen of the book that Erica Chenoweth did of all revolutions in the 20th century, violent and nonviolent. It's about 50-50 how successful they were. But the one thing that was clear was the violent movements recreated the kind of authoritarian structure because they had to do that when they were organizing that way. So colonialism became neocolonialism. The nonviolent movements, like what was demonstrated in the Netherlands and in Norway and in the places where even as Hitler came in, they had a different approach. Those countries became the most progressive of all of Europe. And why is that? It's because the nonviolent movement trained people more in democracy and in collective decision making. So we have a lot to learn from the past on all this, and there are people with us who have studied those things.
Well, that's an incredibly important discussion that we have to have going forward. I mean, clearly, violence doesn't help us in this country, and it's very interesting that there's a database that shows the future success of countries that have nonviolent revolutions as opposed to violent ones. That's a really interesting and important discussion. I read a long book about nonviolence a few years ago. You know what they said the number one nonviolent tool in terms of effectiveness is against a dictatorship?
Ridicule.
Ridicule. And God knows we get that from Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel. I mean, those guys are really good at what they do. So, I mean, I watch them every night, late at night, and
It's
that
not
that
surprising
keeps
that
us
many of
good.
us get our news from the late night comedians, the court jesters
Right.
that is ridicule the king.
And Desi and what's her name and Rachel Maddow and ridicule is where it's at, and we'll have to come back to this next week. That's an incredibly important discussion. Is the nonviolent resistance, and it just occurred to me having watched Dylan last night, the Dylan movie. What is it about Bob Dylan? Has he ever been? Does he show up at demonstrations? Has Bob? Let me tell you who's been arrested at Diablo Canyon. Jackson Brown has been arrested at Diablo Canyon. Bonnie Raitt has been with us all the way. These are celebrities who really put themselves on the line. Bob Dylan has not. So anyway, just a thought. And seeing Pete Seeger in that movie, just totally inspirational. Beautiful job. Anyway, I want to remind people in LA, email me to see this movie over the weekend called Far Out. Mike Hurst, you want the last word here? We're about to go.
Yeah, I've got a link that I'm dropping about the huge mobilizations, the grassroots mobilizations that's coming up this weekend. Almost all of them Saturday, April 5th, I believe. We're taking to the streets, and hopefully there will be follow-up like you've been advocating, Sluggo and Howie and Tatanka. Thank you all for your wisdom. Please use that link, get involved if you can. And we're just going to do the work that we have to do to rebuild our democracy.
Well, let's get this QR code thing out there or whatever we come up with. Let's meet Lee, say Wednesday. And Howie, you should be part of it, obviously. And Jenny, and we'll get Dave Saltman to talk. All you guys, if you want to be involved, email me, solartopia@gmail. We will have this meeting. Thank you, Mike, for providing that link. Mike, you should be part of this too, obviously, and Steve and Paul. And so Murtaza, Carl Grossman, let's do this, say Wednesday. I'm going to throw out 2 o'clock Pacific time. That's why it's 5 o'clock Eastern. We're still within the workday. And let's put that out there. Email me, Solartopia. I will email you with a link. Steve, if you're game to run a Zoom at 5 o'clock on Wednesday, if not, we'll get somebody to do it. And then this 420, guys, time to toke up. Well, this was a mind-boggling meeting. Thank you very, very much, everybody. We still have 46 people with us. We have the longest attention span of anybody in the country. Have a great week. We'll be back again next week, and join us 2 o'clock Pacific time on Wednesday if you want to be part of this organizing thing with Lee, Tatanka, and the rest of us. Okay, everybody, no nukes. See you Wednesday or else in a week. Take care. Thank you.
Si se puede.
Thank you, Steve, for engineering. As always, Mike, everybody, no nukes.